Yeah, Princess, I think you can go ahead because Carlos is sorting out his connection. So if anybody wants to raise their hand to talk, then basically we can go in order there.
Cool. Um, so I think I'm just gonna talk about like what I thought because I actually really liked the readings this week. They were a bit lengthy, but mostly just because I can't skim it all. So, um, I thought it was interesting because quite a few of them mentioned, like starting out in like the countryside, and people were saying that to sort of like fortify revolutionary forces, that it was best to be in the countryside and, dealing with the issues of the problems of the masses out there. And I thought that was interesting because when you compare it to say like the US and right now, um, and I could be wrong on this, but I feel like here a lot of the people who would be more likely to be revolutionary would be in the cities because that's where you have a lot of people of color. You have the Black communities and Latino communities. We seem to be predominantly located in cities. And I found that interesting because I feel like it would be a reverse where you would start something in, the New Yorks and Bostons and Atlantas and then move outward. I feel like if there was initial progress or initial first steps, that it would be out in the cities. And then, I was kind of comparing a lot of stuff with Seattle because I don't know how many people have heard about Seattle, but I guess they have like people just set up an autonomous zone, which I thought was the coolest thing ever. And supposedly that there's even people who are armed and what's the word? Like manning the forces and like taking turns and all this. And it was really interesting. But it was just in Seattle, and I felt like my initial reaction was, oh, I don't know how, I always think of Seattle as like a very white hipster kind of place, but it turns out it's not. Um, and so that just kind of made me think because I always feel that in the US, a lot of us are really pacified to be, you know, kind of kumbaya, pie in the sky, just don't really instigate anything too physical or too violent, and don't really try to do anything that drastic. So I was really surprised by that, and just comparing, you know, just comparing different things. And I started thinking about how in I think it was the Lenin piece, he was saying, oh, well, he says the reorganization of work should consist in suspending for a time institutions which are not absolutely essential. And I think that's funny because right now, just by virtue of the fact that there's a pandemic, that is what's happened, or rather at least to a degree, because I know a lot of places are trying to reopen. And it just feels like that makes it the most perfect time to do things like this. Or at the same time, he was saying that the collection of arms from the population is an integral part of this work. And, the US, obviously, there's a lot of people who have guns and different things like that for various reasons. And, it's different from state to state, but I feel like you have the workings to actually do proactive work that could get somewhere. And then, my last comment was thinking of how, not everybody has a gun. So what do you do in those moments? And I saw there's a video like a week or two ago in Mexico where somebody poured some sort of liquid on an officer and then lit it on fire. And I thought that was great. And I was like, oh, well, how do you do that? And then there's different ways you would do that. But even as far as filling up a water balloon with some sort of flammable liquid, I don't know. Just kind of chucking it, see what happens. I don't know. I just was thinking about different things like that. So that's kind of my take on the readings.
Hey, everybody. This is Ramiro with Anticonquista. I'm talking with Carlos right now. He said he's rebooting his internet, so he's going to join us again in a few minutes. But in the meantime, I just wanted to ask folks to open it up again to everybody about your reaction to the readings, and thank you for your comments so far. Anyone else want to share? I just wanted to mention that because he's going to join us in a few minutes. So anyone else had any comments on the readings or anything that stuck out to them?
Hello, this is Alejandria. I really enjoyed reading the piece on Mao's materialism, what's it called? Or on the relation between knowledge and practice and knowing and doing. I just thought that was a really kind of powerful reading about kind of exactly what this whole meeting and the whole center theme is about, of just moving from thought to action and combining, theory and practice. Really liked it.
Cool. Anybody else?
I think Camilo had his hand up.
Yeah, hello, comrades. Yeah, I enjoyed all the readings, to be quite honest. But one of the things that caught my eye between a lot of them, everything from Che to Mao, to some of the final ones, is that everything involving the masses. So if the masses are involved in one way, whether they're joining the struggle little by little, or whether they're being provided shelter and food and whatnot, kind of intersecting with what the Black Panthers did in the 60s and early 70s, then obviously that gathers more of the masses towards the struggle to ultimately want to be part of it. So kind of like seeing everything that's happened there, and from Cuba to China and in Africa, obviously that certain things had to happen in order for something more to happen. So, and then there's never really a perfect time to ultimately start something, but there's evidence in a lot of things that they've experienced that even if you just look at other forms of history, certain things occur that ultimately lead that ruling class, whether it's the czar or something along those lines, has to end. Especially if the people are feeling the oppression that they're feeling. Here, for instance, in the USA, we have over 40 million people unemployed. Nobody's been bailed. I mean, the only people that have been bailed out have been, the giant corporations and certain millionaires. And obviously we have the pandemic, and we have a giant race issue that we obviously see that imperialism within the USA and obviously globally, the white supremacist racism is not only here in the USA, it's a global thing. So I think that's something that I think a lot of the petty bourgeoisie or the Democrats or people that are more liberal have to start to understand that, racism is big here in the USA, but it's also big throughout the world. The white supremacy through the US military is spread everywhere. So it's not just here in the USA, but I think people are little by little are starting to open up to that idea that, it's bigger than just George Floyd. It's much bigger than that. And that's something I think that in terms of a global struggle, it's starting to show little by little, just your things we saw last year, what we're seeing this year, just here within our borders. And and I've noticed Seattle. I mean, that's pretty interesting. I've never seen anything like that here in the States. Obviously, they're painting murals, being peaceful, and everything's going well for them now. And it's definitely a sign of something that could be replicated or something similar in other parts of the country. But I enjoy the readings, and a lot of things especially doing stuff for the people seems to be one of the big things. If the people are aligned with the struggle, their consciousness is only going to wake up more and more because they're experiencing everything right now. And if they're experiencing something they've even never experienced, perhaps like white protesters have never experienced brutality from a cop, perhaps like some of us, like myself, have, now they're seeing how that feels. And a lot of them themselves, they're not liking it. So I think that's opening up their consciousness a little bit more through that experience.
Cool. Thank you, Camilo. I think Alex M had their hand raised, and then I see Fernando Red has their hand raised. And again, if you want to join the lineup for speaking, just click on raise hand in the function. I think Carlos is back, but let's give it a second. But in the meantime, okay, I think Carlos, can you hear us? Okay. Why don't you go ahead? I think it was Alex M. And then let's see if Carlos is able to join us.
Cool. Hey, everyone. So what Princesa was saying about how, I forget which reading it was, but they spoke about, let me unraise my hand. They spoke about the masses meeting and organizing in the countryside. And I also kind of, that wasn't really aligned with what I thought, just because I feel like right now most of the uprisings are in cities, and the population density is more conducive to like mass movements, but it is also easier to meet and discuss strategy and tactics without surveillance in like more rural areas, which is something we're dealing with right now where I'm based. And then also like the Che reading resonated with me because I noticed like, and I'm sure wherever you're based too, a lot of groups are making tactical decisions without like the full support and like consent of the people. And that's like a weird thing that we're dealing with right now, just because how do you like reconcile that need for like making these decisions with the consent of the people with state surveillance and the fact that it's so much easier to like, I don't know, like hop on a Zoom call or like, yeah.
So I think we have Carlos back on. Carlos, you want to test your audio to see if we're good?
Yeah, can you guys hear me? Yeah? Yeah, sorry about that, comrades. I think it was, my Wi-Fi is playing up, but I'm on my phone network now. I'm not sure where you guys have gotten up to in the readings. From what I heard the last comrade say, we have to adapt. The reason why we included those readings, Che's guerrilla warfare, as well as other readings, are actually very similar. Amilcar Cabral's reading is very similar to guerrilla warfare as well. And the reason why we thought it was important to add those readings is because they all say the same thing, and it's about applying a scientific Marxist method to the local conditions and to the local experiences and to the very particular experiences of your community. And that, as I was saying in the introduction, which probably nobody heard because of my choppy internet, we can't apply Marxism as if it were a universal law of a simple, equation of a working class against the bourgeoisie, because in our experiences as colonized people, in our history, we have seen that there's more to it. There's racism, there's sexism, there's colonial exploitation, there's neocolonialism, and these are all things that we have to take into account when we're thinking about action and when we're taking action. And I think that came across in the readings, in most of the readings that we posted. That's a common thread. We have to, when we're thinking about taking action, we have to take into account what our particular community needs. I've got a few ideas, a few, like very specific ideas of how, the way we could kind of do work in our community, particular work in our community. But I guess we can discuss that later when we've discussed the readings a little bit further. Does anybody have any other comments on Che Guevara's reading?
I had my hand raised, and I do. So I don't know if I have the floor. Is what I'm trying to say.
Go ahead, comrade. Sorry, I didn't hear that.
All right. Yeah, all good. So, just an introduction. My name is Fernando. I don't actually live in the States. I live in Chile. I'm a member of the Chilean Communist Party Proletarian Action. We're a very quickly growing party here in Chile since October. I don't know. Sorry, I not get sidetracked. Just something I wanted to bring up is and a caution that I want to have, because y'all are doing great work up there, and I want to see it keep going. It's just to have you want to have your feet well placed upon the ground. And perhaps you guys know this, and maybe I'm speaking to the choir, but just to throw it out there, the texts that are highlighted, I'm familiar with them. Those are like speaking in the context of a previously already well organized communist party. You know, even in the case of Cuba, where Fidel Castro started with 40 soldiers and ended up losing almost all of them, only 18. He still had wide connections throughout the country, and he had the ability to recuperate his forces. So, you know, like perhaps for the people who are kind of newer to this stuff, you know, there's stages to this. This has to be built. You know, don't go throwing Molotov cocktails by yourself. Yeah, you're not gonna get much done.
Yeah, for sure, and I think what we intend in doing these readings is, you know, we're like we said in the last study group, we're for all forms of struggle. Realistically, we have to see where we're at. Like the comrade's right. We can't just go out and attempt what Che Guevara and Castro and Amilcar Cabral and other revolutionaries did, not just because we're not ready for it. I think in the West and specifically in the Latin American diaspora in the West, we're not ready for that type of action, but also because it's outdated. You know, we can't apply the revolutionary methods and tactics of 30, 40, 50 years ago to today. And so one of the things I wanted to say was that when reading these texts, what I think we need to do is think about how we can apply that revolutionary method, that scientific method of revolution to our current climate and to where we are geographically. And I think one of the ways we could do that, for example, I was thinking, is things like, you know, in Mao's reading, he talked about the well-being of the masses and helping the masses, supporting the masses. And how can we do that as the Western diaspora, as Latin Americans or Black people living in the West? Specifically for Latin Americans, for example, we could do things, very particular tasks, like helping to translate documents for our communities that might not speak English, helping to support our people, especially in the pandemic. If they don't understand information, maybe help them translate information that might be useful to them, that kind of thing. So we have to always apply, when we're reading these things, we can't, you know, think of applying them directly, because that would be ridiculous and you know, extremely dogmatic. If Comrade Andrew or Comrade Ramiro, who have co-host ability, if you guys see people who have their hands up.
I do. I see Camilo has his hand up. I see Fernando, Vic, who I think has had their hand up for a while. Let's see. Let me just turn it around. Princesa has her hand up. Vic, Camilo, Hillary has their hand up. And yeah, those are the ones who have their hand up.
Cool. Who do you think's had their hand up for most? You said Vic. Let's go with Vic.
I think it's been like 30 minutes. My fault.
All right.
Yeah, go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
So I wanted to ask a question that I've been thinking about, because I've been reading Settlers in conjunction with the readings. So, you know, when these readings talk about the masses, right? I don't know if everyone believes this, but I think that, you know, the proletariat in the U.S. is a minority, right? That's an idea. And so how can all this be translated to a country in which the proletariat is predominantly black and brown people who are a minority? we can't rely on white liberals who are so eager during this time to co-opt this movement and use it for their own political ends to vote for the next Democrat or whatever. Right. So, how can we deal with that fact, as a minority in America? I think I just wanted to ask people like what they thought about that and how can we do. All right.
Thank you, comrade. And I would suggest if one of the comrades in the U.S., maybe Comrade Ramiro could take that answer, and that he could take that question.
Yeah, I mean, I think like even ourselves as third world, as communists who understand the global class divide between the first world and the third world, if you were to go to, for example, a Native American reservation in the Southwest, they're living in third world conditions, right? If you go to what they call the Four Corners, New Mexico, Arizona, Utah, and some other state, I forgot. But Navajo Nation, they have the living conditions of like Haiti or Panama. And so, and also if you go to certain predominantly Black towns, especially in the Black Belt in the South, for example, like Mobile, Alabama, or even if you're talking about Cancer Alley in Louisiana, which has some of the highest COVID death rates in the world and has also like some of the worst pollution in predominantly Black areas, they're also living in third world conditions. And so I think in terms of within working in the belly of the beast, one of the things to really keep in mind is to unite with communities that are already living in third world conditions, uniting with them and showing them that our enemy is not, Iran or Venezuela or China. Our enemy is on Wall Street and in Washington. And if we unite, if the African nation in the U.S. unites with the indigenous Latino nation in the U.S. as well, and oppressed global South people unite here, we have the power to shut down this economy overnight. Because if you go to anywhere in the U.S., most of the people who are opening up shops, who are holding up the economy, are people from the global South, immigrants. And so I think within the U.S. And also the U.K. and other places in the global North, I think that's sort of the role that we can play, is uniting our people within the global South diaspora and raising an anti-imperialist consciousness and unity and really identifying, like Carlos was saying, the key problems that are affecting people. Like I always think of it as like, okay, how do I get somebody like my family who's they don't give a fuck who Marx is or Lenin or Mao, but what they care about is like, am I gonna have a job tomorrow? Can I get COVID testing? So I think in terms of the U.S., I think that's a good approach.
Thank you, Comrade Ramiro. And what I would add to that as well, and I think this comes across in I think you were referring, Comrade Vic, to Settlers by Sakai, right? And I think I think what they say and what they describe in Sakai and other third worldist reading is that we need to make our struggle an international struggle and see ourselves, oppressed communities in the West, as an extension of oppressed communities in the global South, and for us as Latin Americans particularly, as an extension of Latin America. And so it's very difficult, and I live in London. There's a lot of Latinos here and people don't know that, but it's very difficult to organize and mobilize Latin Americans, even oppressed Latin American immigrants who are on low wages and living in conditions of poverty, because there is a certain level of privilege. But what we need to do is kind of harness the revolutionary spirit of our people here in these communities and show them that we have to struggle with the homeland. We have to struggle for the homeland, in whatever way we can. If it's through study circles like we're doing now, or through, like in one of the readings that we suggested was a few news quite a few newspapers from the Black Panthers from decades ago who were, organizing their community to see themselves as an extension of Africa, of Black people around the world, and not kind of see themselves in a bubble within the West. So yeah, that's what I would suggest to that. Does anybody have any direct comments to what Vic asked? If Comrade Ramiro or Comrade Andrew can.
So I see Hillary has her hand up. Aleja, I'm just going to read out people who have their hands up, and maybe Carlos, if you want to just jot them down or remember them. So we have Comrade Takia has her hand up. Aleja Hammer.
Yeah, I'll go with Comrade Takia.
Oh, okay, thank you. So I guess I don't really have an answer for that, but I did read this Sakai also, and that's another question that I've been thinking about as I've gone over these other readings. When it talks about when Mao talks about gathering the strength, or basically anyone who writes, any revolutionary who writes about guerrilla warfare often makes the point that the strength of the guerrilla is drawn from the masses. And so I've definitely thought about what that means in a U.S. context when you think about the stratification, or as Sakai would put it, is the total class differentiation between the white proletariat and the colonized worker. It's interesting. Yeah, I've definitely thought about that. And another thing I kind of wanted to add is like a question on top of that question is, after doing these readings, a conclusion that I've drawn is that, protracted warfare draws its strength from, a rural base. But at the same time, what does that look like in a country where the rural base is the stronghold, right? Where the urban center is not the stronghold? Because if you look at rural America, that's where the largest U.S. military bases are. Throughout the South, even here in North Carolina, the largest Army base in America is here in Fayetteville. And not just that, not just, the armed forces, but in cities like Chicago and even cities like here, Raleigh, Charlotte in North Carolina, when a lot of these police officers get off work, they're returning to rural areas, right? So we have to also think about, kind of shifting the paradigm of protracted warfare taking place in the rural zone. And I think another version of On Guerrilla Warfare. I mean, there's so many writers who wrote with that title. But there's one that comes out of Brazil that I'm reminded of in this moment. And it talks about guerrilla warfare in the urban center. And I think for communists fighting within the metropole, I think that's an important reading. So I'll stop there.
Cool. Awesome. Thank you, Comrade Takia. I think also what I would say and what I want to reiterate is that the readings that we suggested for today, Guevara's guerrilla warfare, Amilcar Cabral, who are all revolutionaries who are guerrilla fighters as well. We added it not because we think that in the U.S. and in the West and in the diaspora, which is the community that we belong to, I don't think, though, people can debate me and debate me on this, but I don't think we are necessarily going to build a guerrilla army within the belly of the beast. And I think it would be quite difficult. And right now, I think what we can do, and especially with those readings, is try and see what we can, the methods that these guerrilla fighters and these guerrilla strategists use. How can we apply those strategies to our own experience, our own conditions right now. So, for example, I was thinking, as I was reading those texts, I was thinking like, how could we use these tactics on social media, guerrilla tactics on social media? How can we build the foco, the nuclei forces, guerrilla forces, but not necessarily in the countryside and as a guerrilla war, but online, which is kind of the platforms that we have access to here in the West. We don't want to be idealist and think that we can, go to war, go on a military war against the United States or Western forces, which I think in this current moment would be a mistake, a huge mistake. But how can we battle them with the tools that we have right now, which is social media? And I think, obviously I'm part of Anticonquista, and it's not to pat ourselves on the back, but following what we've done at Anticonquista, or following what Comrade Takia has done with Riot Revolt and other comrades who, not just us, but a lot of Black and brown communists who are now using social media as a platform for struggle. And I think right now we could use those guerrilla tactics online. We could use those guerrilla tactics, not just online, but in our local communities in terms of, going, especially for you guys who are in the US, going out into the protests and making sure that we're following a communist line, a socialist line, and that the struggle's not being hijacked by liberals, etc. Those are places where we can right now apply those tactics, I think. Does anybody else, any other comrades have their hand up for particularly for the Guevara reading? Let me check the chat. All right, if whoever has a direct point on this, on the Guevara reading, can go next. Comrade Ramiro, if you could maybe facilitate that.
Oh, sure. So I think we have, I'm just looking at the screen right now. Hillary has her hand up, Princesa has her hand up, and Aleja Hammer.
Let's go with Hillary.
All right. I must, first off, thank you. I must caution, as I said in the chat, my question isn't about the Guevara reading specifically. It was for an earlier point. So I think I could absolutely go last if that's more appropriate at this time. I don't wish to disrupt the flow.
Okay, thank you, comrade. Let's see if does any other comrade have any points on Guevara? Okay, yeah, I think I see somebody. Aleja Hammer, if you can go next.
Yeah, I didn't exactly do a full reading of the Guevara reading, but yeah, I was thinking about the kind of like using those, like the things that are being written about and stuff, and thinking like, yeah, especially since everything's so different now, it's like very, it's a very different landscape. But yeah, I was just thinking about like, yeah, especially how you were mentioning social media, how like it's kind of similar to like how we in general like try to like the methods have to be kind of in opposition to like the current order, but as organized. And so kind of thinking about how to use like democracy and like different forms of democracy to like make decisions collectively, but then also carry them out so that we can get our objectives done. Like if there's like say like an ideological war or like a struggle on social media with like Blackout Tuesday and things like that, which are co-opted by liberals, it's very important to make like, yeah, kind of like stark sort of like antagonistic ideas that invalidate those and also like offer a more effective solution, and like a more kind of like very compact, clear communication that has like the critique and a solution to it. But then that the whole process of doing that also needs to kind of be as organized and as dispersed among like different groups of people to sort of have like that guerrilla type of effect. And then also sort of the protracted effect of having like many different people involved over like a long period of time. And so having a good enough organizational structure to kind of keep an ideological front, say on social media and like Instagram, to make sure that kind of like it's easily identifiable if there's like a large enough social media like campaign to like combat a given like liberal or reactionary idea, to just really like go in on these ideas, but then also to like have like the democratic sort of decision making and like really just really trying to apply these things, but also remembering the like effective tools from the past. Sorry, it was a little rambling, but thank you very much.
No, that's all good. Thank you, Comrade Aleja, and those are good points that you raise. And just as you were speaking there, I was also thinking of things like we can organize like the example of Anticonquista, and how with a few comrades we created and developed Anticonquista as an information website first of all, and then gradually and progressively we saw that we could actually have a more direct material effect on struggle and the revolution. And I don't know how much you guys know about Anticonquista, but what we've been doing, for example, is sending funds to Latin America. And even though that isn't direct action from us, the material resources that we can provide to comrades in Latin America, and we've donated money to revolutionary organizations in Haiti, Puerto Rico, Colombia, now Chile as well. So it's that kind of thing that we can do. We can, as social media, I guess you could say it's kind of like a social media guerrilla fighter group kind of thing, where we collect resources to have a revolutionary impact, quite a direct revolutionary impact on the homeland, and as well as in the communities where we live as well. Does any other comrade have any direct points on Che Guevara's guerrilla warfare, or anything that we have talked about up until now? If Comrade Andrew or Comrade Ramiro can see who has their hand up.
Yeah, we have Princesa has her hand up, Hillary has her hand up, Tanisha.
Okay, go ahead, Comrade Princesa.
So what I wanted to say kind of, give me 1 second. Yeah, helping, and give me 5 minutes, okay? Can you close the door? Yeah, okay.
Go ahead.
Sorry. I'm kind of babysitting at the moment.
That's okay.
So it's kind of, my comments tangentially related to the Che Guevara thing, but also just something I've been thinking in general throughout the readings is that, so I had a conversation with someone in my family recently about like, all protests don't work, and that this one will be squashed worse than, or like less effective than say in the 1960s, because the conditions of the day are different. And I've argued really consistently that the conditions of the day like are really, really good, for one thing, there's social media, so I'm going to get to that in a second. And then the second thing is also on the COVID. Give me a minute, okay? Is also on the COVID thing. So, for example, I'm sorry, just give me 1 second.
No problem. Take your time, comrade. Maybe we can go to another comrade while Comrade Princesa organizes herself. Comrade Ramiro, if you can go to whoever has the...
We have Vic, Hillary, and that's it.
I came back.
Does Comrade Vic have a direct point on what we were talking about?
I think Princess is back, yeah.
So
Okay,
what I
go
was trying to say is that, for one thing, like, sorry, I just have to kind of re-get my thoughts. So for one thing, I feel like in terms of, say, helping the masses and stuff like that, because we kind of talked about how, like, how could you do things that are relevant? How do you actually help people? And so that kind of reminded me of, the Mao reading, he was saying that the way that they got such large forces, like 88% in one area and 88% in another, was that they were actually directly helping the masses. And I feel like the beneficial thing of COVID has been that it's revealing the realities of the systems that we live in. And it's made very clear what people's needs are in terms of food security, in terms of housing security and things like that. So, I think one of the ways that movements in general at this time can actually gain a greater momentum is by addressing those realities, and at the same time saying, hey, have you noticed how in 2 weeks everything just collapsed all of a sudden? Why is that? Let's think about that. Let's talk about that. And for another thing, kind of going off of the guerrilla social media thing, I feel like to a degree that's already happening. I just think that, it's a bit scattered, where some people are very like, yeah, let's take a knee, and other people are like, no, let's go about this a bit further. And some people are more full on radical. And so there's just kind of like a dispersal of sort of how that's going. But, you've got, like, there's a Black Lives Matter YouTube streaming thing that the ads of it are just directly making money for Black Lives Matter, which is really cool. Or also, like, how social media that we have today is basically the radio comms of the past. And so the piece from Cabral was saying, they have radio, but it's kind of, sometimes there's a delay, things like that. Well, today we have social media. Everybody's able to be their own journalist. Everybody's able to record exactly what's happening in that moment. They're able to live stream things that are happening right now that you wouldn't be able to do just 5 years ago. And I feel like, kind of just encouraging some of the things that are already out there. People are saying like, hey, this is all, I think I shared something today, like on my Facebook, that was like, people are talking about all these individual things of racism, of education disparities, of ICE, and how, as if they're disconnected, but they're all connected. And I think a lot of people are really talking about that. I think one of the methods is not explicitly starting things on social media, not that you shouldn't, but rather that there already are some things that are existing. So to add to it and to, encourage dialogue and take it even further. And then just like another point, because I had a lot of points, I'm sorry. Going back to like the whole bit where it's like the reverse from rural to cities, but from cities to rural. I feel like long term, if people were to really truly talk about changing class and things like challenging class struggle, you would have to also begin to talk to people that are in the working class in the more outskirts, like the more rural areas. So for example, farmers, you hear a lot of stuff about farmers, and they'll be white, they'll be black, I don't know too much about their specific issues, but there's that's one group that you could really easily be like, hey, have you noticed all these problems and how you've got to deal with these massive corporations, and you can't, you basically, like, there's different groups of people that you could talk to about capitalism and about how everything is just kind of collapsing all at once, and you have to just dump out food when it's unnecessary. I think that right now is the most important time, like the best possible time to instigate anything. and like the Chaz Zone, they've brought up amongst their many issues that they've kind of started talking about. One of them was ICE, and there's a connection, at least a little bit, between those different movements. That's kind of, I lost my train of thought for a second, but that's it. I yield my time.
Okay, cool. Thank you, comrade. And yeah, I think an important point that you make is that there is a lot of social media movement around the current rebellion, and how do we, as socialists, communists, Latin Americans, use this time to kind of bring it all together rather than be all scattered. And I think that's also part of the readings, like how do we organize ourselves as a kind of focused revolutionary group. And that doesn't necessarily mean that we have to all join the same group, and we're not advocating, we don't, even though it would be cool if people joined and supported Anticonquista, but what we really want is for Latin American socialists and communists in general to kind of come together and help combat and help take advantage of the situation, if it means that we have to, create a coalition or some kind of joint forces to take advantage of the situation. So yeah, that's an important point. Any comrades who have their hand up?
I think Vic and Hillary have their hand up.
Go ahead. Did you say Jake?
Vic.
Okay, Vic. Go ahead, Vic.
Yeah. I just want to say, like, the previous two speakers are really well together. I got a lot from that, talking about online methods. That's something that I've always kind of derided or dismissed. I didn't really know about all those other things that people were working on. So I wanted to know, like, beyond, like, fundraising, as Carlos was saying, like, maybe he can expand upon that. I've always thought of, like, social media as just a place for, like, amplification rather than discussion. That's one comment I saw earlier today. In a place like Twitter, where, you can have fascists and all sorts of people commenting without any censorship. Like, unless it's a forum like this where people can be censored if they're promoting, like, reactionary views, I don't think, like, we can have that kind of discussion. I don't know where I'm going with that, but maybe someone else can comment.
Cool. Thank you, Comrade Vic. One thing that I would add to that is that, I think it's a kind of like a double thing that we're trying to do. Is a twofold kind of thing that we're trying to do. One is provide information for our community, and the other thing is provide material support for revolutionary organizations. And, it's, for example, at Anticonquista, we see and we believe that the most revolutionary class of the people, the oppressed people that are most likely to combat capitalism, imperialism, and try to dismantle it is people in the global South. And for us as Latin Americans, what we try and do is support organizations in the global South. And how we do that is, as I say, both by providing information to debunk what's said in the capitalist Western media, but also by providing material resources for people on the front lines back home. But obviously in these times where there's a rebellion in the United States, we also have to take advantage of that. And if that means that we have to kind of prioritize information and material resources for people on the front line in the US, especially Latin American and Black communities fighting state oppression and especially for people fighting towards socialism, I think we could also at the same time channel our resources and our information to help that struggle too. Yeah, that's what I would say to that. Comrade, I think it was Comrade Hillary who had her hand up next.
Thank you. I guess one thing I really liked about the readings was, while of course they are tailored for their own specific context in their specific eras, the revolutionary optimism that was rooted in the real conditions, I think were really great for inspiring a sense of hope rather than a sense of insecurity in potential readers. I also really liked the emphasis on the pragmatism seen in these, and I think that's especially relevant as even on social media. One of my friends, for example, from high school, who's a little more newer on a lot of these topics, was well-intentioned, but was espousing people emulate the style seen, say, for example, in the Hong Kong protests, not knowing the history of ties to American and British imperialism and colonialist apologia, and especially we saw with Jimmy Lai and Joshua Wong recently, with anti-Blackness, particularly directed at LeBron James and others, unfortunately, during these issues. And basically, in that case, these kinds of readings were after kind of, I was able to engage with this person saying, you really, there's a lot of anti-Blackness going on here. We really need to educate ourselves on these things, and trying to discourage the emulation of these specific tactics given the very different material conditions there. I think that shows all the more important it is that people are being given access to, for their own well-being, safe, grounded, dialectical reading materials. And I've especially reading the works of Mao, especially here, have been, I thought, incredibly both moving on an emotional angle, but also very pragmatic in a way. The tactics espoused in more imperialist movements just are not, in this case. So I'm really grateful to have this reading list to share with respectful comrades in good faith. And I'm happy to say if in that one instance alone, that comrade's opinion had changed. So I look forward to, without singling out any, while still exercising discretion, of course, social media is still social media. I don't treat it like it's private, and we should not. I like that this reading material could be an excellent starting point for a lot of people eager to learn more. Thank you.
Thank you, Comrade Hillary. And I think what we're trying to do with this study session, and hopefully in more coming study sessions, if you guys are interested, because this is all based on you guys' interest and if you're motivated to do so. We're at Anticonquista, we're always motivated to, try and facilitate and use our platform to help this kind of discussion. Because is this specific thing, this study group, that is part of the action, and what we're trying to do today, what we're talking about today is, about taking action. And I think this particular thing that we're doing today is taking action and, being proactive in informing ourselves so that we can go out in our communities and bring about the social change that Mao and Cabral and Guevara were talking about. And as we've been saying all along, it's going to take different forms and methods because of the communities where we are, of the places where we are. But that's the idea, to kind of play a role in social change and revolutionary social change. Thank you, Comrade Hillary, for that. Comrade Ramiro, is there anybody who has the hand up?
Yeah, we have two comrades with their hands up, Comrade Takia and Comrade, I think Aleja Hammer had their hand up earlier, but it's not up anymore. But yeah, Comrade Takia has their hand up.
Yeah, go ahead, Comrade Takia.
So I just wanted to make another comment about the Mao reading, the one on titled "Be Concerned with the Well-Being of the Masses and the Methods of Work." So in that one, I just what kind of stood out to me was this focus on, meeting the daily needs of the people, the problems of everyday life. And Mao talks about food, shelter, and I thought it was significant that he also talks about childcare and also childbearing. And I think when we think about, like, I saw that, the Black Panther newspaper was one of the attached readings. And like, when we think about the most popular thing that we know about the Black Panther Party was the food program, right? So trying to meet the basic needs of the people. And I think for our organizations, I see a lot of organizations that are doing like much needed work around food. And I think it's important if we can begin to expand our work into bringing healthcare workers into the struggle, and not just providing food, but also like securing food sovereignty, right? So like people in the rural parts of America, as well as people who are in the cities, can dictate. They can't be controlled through food, right? Which is a popular mechanism of control in the third world, right? So I think understanding that in times of war, and which if we understand like society as it is like the war is already here, right? It's just to varying degrees, right? Like on the individual level, as well as if we want to talk about whether the war is concealed or hidden, right? It's already here. So we have to think about, as the war escalates, right? As the class war that is currently ongoing escalates, there's going to be attacks on food. So we have to remember that when we're like doing our feed the people stuff, right? Like, what if this supply chain is disrupted, right? Which it will be, right? As this war escalates. And another thing I think about when I think about the escalating class war is this running theme I've run into across all of my different, like, dibbing and dabbling in like whatever guerrilla warfare text or military science text is this idea of like communications and like the fickle nature of being able to communicate with each other. So I think we have to be thinking about how are we engaging with one another that is off of social media, that is off of the internet, because I mean, we've seen like year after year after year a new attack on internet freedom, even though internet freedom is hailed as the freedom of Western society, right? Every year there's a new attack on internet freedom. So how are we building communications that anticipate that? And given this ongoing attack, like, how do we combat it, right? So some of the things I was thinking about is like, if you look at the uprisings across the country, right? Different cities, every city, like, basically tried to burn down their right wing, like, press, right? Here in Raleigh, we know it's the ABC 11 News. I mean, that place got totally fucked up, right? Look at Atlanta. It's no mistake that people went and fucked up CNN, right? Like, that's not lost on people, the reason why we have to destroy, their communications. So we have to be thinking about ways that, if we talk about how this open conflict is like dangerous for us, we have to be thinking about covert ways that we can disrupt and destroy their communications, because it's constantly being waged against us. So these are just like my comments and thoughts regarding, some of the readings. It's hard for me to like separate each reading from like, but these are just some of my thoughts on some of the readings. So.
Thank you, Comrade Takia. And I would like to ask you, as somebody who's deeply involved in action and taking action in their community, like, how do you do it? How do you combine ideology with action? How do you, because I know you're involved in trying to provide basic food to the community. So how do you go about providing basic food whilst at the same time, which is a very urgent kind of necessity that people have, with the longer term objective of politicizing our communities?
Well, I just would say that like I've kind of been thinking a lot about, I don't remember where I saw or heard this Kwame Ture point he was making about like the twofold nature of revolution is that like you have to build something while also destroying something, right? So I think always like operating with that in mind is that like I guess that should like guide our work, or is like how I try to like remember that like, okay, we fucked some shit up, but also like how have we reduced our reliance on so-called the left hand of the state, right? Because the other day I was on this call and this phrase came up, around like defunding the police, which is like, this idea that we gotta weaken the right hand of the state to strengthen the left, right? We're gonna defund the police so that we could get more social workers, and we could get more like racist, white supremacist social workers, and we can have like all the Indian reform schools we want, and we can fucking send our kids to schools where they don't learn about themselves in any kind of a positive light. Like that's the hand of the state we want to strengthen. It's not. So every time we battle against the right hand, we have to be building something that makes it clear that the left hand isn't your friend either. So I think that's how I operate.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's an awesome example of the kind of action, the kind of methods that we can all kind of apply in our communities. Thank you for that, Comrade Takia. Do any comrades have any direct points on what has been said?
I see Aleja Hammer has her hand up.
Go ahead, Aleja.
Yeah, I really liked what Hillary had to say about the reading, like talking about how like revolutionary optimism is so important, and like really having like faith in like the people that you're trying to like work with and trying to like organize. I think that is so important, like, because it can sometimes be difficult, I guess, to sort of like always be trying to move people into like that revolutionary direction instead of like kind of like never or always forward, never backwards, and like always it's because it's in some ways easier to kind of let things be liberal, but then to be revolutionary optimistically revolutionary, I don't know. But either way, it's very it can be a very good, like it's a mindset. It's just such a very, very powerful way to like approach, especially the kind of work that Takia had mentioned in terms of like serving the people and like food programs. Because a lot of people might see food programs kind of liberally and just think, oh, it's a small drop in the bucket, but it really does. I think that it can really inspire people into seeing that the new world, kind of run in that socialist and communist manner can really work, even with all of the, like the food taxes and the separation between producers and consumers, just like with the global South and all of that, and to the global North. And then also just one last point on, which was it? The rural and city. I think that point on food security and like being or like cultivating food sovereignty, especially during these times, is like that's something where the rural workers and rural laborers kind of really show that power that, like, as much as proletarian people in the cities have a lot of like practical knowledge that they've accrued through kind of like working in various types of service industry or organizing people in like kind of a like service economy style, that rural workers often have like those practical experiences and practical work experiences in terms of like farming or industry, like fixing machines like tractors. And I know, just as someone who was mostly raised in like close to city centers, that a lot of people, well, sort of in mostly rural areas, but like suburban areas, that there's lots of people I know who have that kind of practical experience. But unfortunately, at least in my area, it's lots of colonizers, so not exactly the revolutionary like mindset there. But it's just amazing to see how like a lot of these concepts really work with each other, and then how these working people all across the global South who have practical experience in food cultivation and food sovereignty can really be a really big help to our movement. But, yeah.
Thank you, Comrade Aleja. And I would say that, those are the kind of things that we were kind of looking for this discussion, like what are the kind of immediate actions that we can take as the Latin American diaspora to help alleviate the urgent basic suffering and the basic meet the needs of our people, whilst at the same time, like we've said, looking forward to a longer term revolutionary change, which is about changing capitalism as a whole. One thing that I wanted to add, which is kind of like, adding to ideas of how we can help, immediate things that we can do, help to our people, is things like here in London where I live, through a union, what we've done is created English classes for Latin American immigrants who, a lot of immigrants who end up here in London come from Spain, who, with the last economic crisis, had to come over to London because in Spain the crisis was much worse. And so, tens of thousands and hundreds of thousands of Latinos have ended up in London. And what we've done is created English lessons and computer lessons for Latin American migrants in order to help them defend themselves at work and be able to defend themselves, obviously with the language barrier, try and help them, communicate when they need to go shopping or if they need to go to the doctors. And some of the things we do is, like, for example, if a lot of them don't speak English, we hold workshops to help them write doctor letters to their doctors explaining what they need or the illnesses that they have, etc. Or help them with translating their bills. They get bills from electricity bills or phone bills, and they don't understand what it says, and or they have some kind of complaint, and those kind of things, those very basic things that people face are the things that we can look into helping with. Whilst at the same time, for example, I give IT lessons, computer lessons to Latin American migrants on Saturdays. And what I do with my computer lessons is teach them the very basic things of how computers work, because these are, some of our people who come from Latin America and who are not very familiar with technology, or who might be older and are not familiar with technology. But what we do is, whilst we're teaching them computing, we at the same time teach them about joining a union. We teach them about socialism. We teach them about imperialism. So we can use these tasks to help our people, and at the same time teach them about the broader struggle of our broader struggle against capitalism and imperialism. And I think that that's something that can be applied to, you know, whatever tasks that we decide to do, whether it's food sovereignty, etc. We can always, you know, combine it with helping them understand the broader struggle that we have. So yeah, does anybody have any other comments on other readings, maybe? Amilcar Cabral, or the readings on the Black Panthers, their newspapers, which have like loads of examples of, you know, very kind of direct actions that they took to help their Black communities all those decades ago. Ramiro, does anybody have their hands up?
No hands up at the moment. So if anybody wants to speak now, forever hold your peace.
Do any comrades have any comments on any of the readings or any comments in general?
Hillary has her hand up.
Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you. Just a quick question, actually. In light of this and related readings, are there any specific, is there a consensus or any specific opinions on good follow-up readings, like War of the Flea or anything like that? Or, you know, I don't know. And again, just was curious to see what would be a recommended jumping off point from here, not counting, of course, the subsequent readings and subsequent study groups.
Thank you, comrade. Readings to follow up on this one. I don't know, comrades, if you have any ideas specifically on like literature on direct action. And I think also I struggled when I came up with the readings, that I struggled to find particular readings for people like us, you know, Latin Americans and who are living in the West. I struggled to find kind of readings that talked about what we could do in the West, and maybe that's a task for us. Maybe that's a task for us to kind of come up with articles and maybe even books to help our people take direct action whilst combining it with ideology. But if anybody has any ideas, any readings, somebody saying the Brown Berets. Does anybody know? And I know Comrade Ramiro has very recently worked with the comrades from Unión del Barrio, which I think we're doing some kind of caravan. And I know that they've been involved with like helping, you know, Latin American immigrants who come from Mexico and Central America, and they're very involved on the ground. Can you tell us a little bit more about that, Comrade Ramiro?
Yeah, they're a group that's been around since I believe the 70s, and it's interesting because Unión del Barrio has people who are Chicano nationalists who believe in the self-determination of the Chicano nation in the Southwest, which belong to Mexico and other indigenous peoples. But they're also, and more importantly, internationalists. They follow the spirit of you know, Hugo Chavez and the concept of Nuestra America and understanding the Southwest and the U.S. as part of Nuestra America. And so they've been doing a lot of programs in Southern California, especially in San Diego. Last year, they were organizing community defenses against the ICE raids. One of the biggest problems here, of course, is a lot of crackdowns on undocumented people. And so Unión del Barrio last year was able to form these comités de resistencia, which are basically like patrol units going around the neighborhood and warning people when ICE would come. It didn't work out exactly as it should, but it was the framework for something broader action that we can take here in the diaspora that I think is pretty cool.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, I saw some of the pictures for that. Do any other comrades have any points or any ideas?
Camilo and Princesa have their hand up, by the way.
Go ahead, Comrade Camilo.
Yeah. So, and specifically with the Cabral reading, so he one of the things that he talked about is that he understands the struggle of that what the Cuban people and Che did and Castro did in Cuba. In particular, their terrain is different than his terrain was as well. So one of the big things that seemed to be the giant difference is that he didn't have mountains to depend on. They had to utilize the swamps and the jungle a little bit more to their advantage to beat the military and to, in one of the battles, kill over 900 of them. So that was pretty interesting to understand that even though when they think about guerrilla warfare, a lot of times we think about mountains, but how they had to adapt to the terrain that they have, and that depending where we are and depending where that struggle is happening, obviously we have to adapt to that terrain as a whole. And the other interesting thing that he mentioned is that the political party is the one that mobilized and pretty much to command the military portion of it, instead of the military being completely separate. Obviously, they had their cadres, but they had a central command one way or another. I thought that was interesting because obviously that changes things, the dynamic of it, to a certain extent of even what we just see in like Western society and how they do that. But the fact that they have a little bit more control of it definitely made it more centralized, and it worked in their favor many times, despite the Portuguese military having the advantage of all the weapons they had and all the artillery that they had. They just one thing that also seemed is they just didn't have the strategic advantage over them because they obviously destroyed the bridges, they destroyed the roads, and they mobilized themselves through foot. And their tactics seem to work pretty well in that terrain as a whole.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that contribution, Comrade. Is that Comrade Camilo, I think? Can we go to, who was somebody else?
We have, I'm just going to read out the people who have their hands up. We have Comrade Yamir, Princesa, and Anthony Sid Aguirre.
Comrade Yamir, go ahead, bro.
Peace, y'all. Yeah, so I just wanted to talk about like what's been said about like I guess like the whole concept of anti-conquista, of it being like the radical narrative for the Latin American and Caribbean diaspora. And I just wanted to point out the fact that like, you know, I think about like how culture is a weapon, and how the fact us like taking control of the narrative and also defending the narrative of social movements within Latin America is important while we're in the West, because we get to connect with our people who have had to migrate out of the region due to imperialism and capitalism, and make them understand and also make them connect with the fact that like the struggles over there connects with the self-determination over here. I feel like it's like, you know, we ourselves, as well as like first generation Latin Americans, Caribbeans born in the West, we also get to decolonize and realize that we are the wretched of the earth, taking back our narrative, you know? So, you know, I just wanted to speak to that just for the fact that like, you know, even in the West, you have our counterparts, you know, people like say like a Marco Rubio, senator from Florida, Obama Menendez, Ted Cruz, and now we have the formation of the anti-right-wing Venezuelan bloc like Carlos Vecchio in Washington, trying to control the narrative of our region. So it's important for us to be unapologetically, you know, revolutionary, unapologetically communist, socialist Latin Americans within the West. I also wanted to speak on the fact that, like, I think one thing that I feel like I haven't seen brought up in this conversation is us calling out anti-Blackness within the Latin American community. Like, we have to also educate our people of the fact that, like, I said this actually at a rally the other day in my community in Spanish, of the fact that, like, Black liberation is interconnected with our liberation, you know, not just for the fact that, you know, Black people are oppressed, the most oppressed, like, identity within the United States, but the fact that we ourselves are of Black ancestry. You know, like we have in our respective countries, we have people who are Afro descendants. And I made the point clear of like the way that America is our mother because we are of indigenous descent. Africa is as well our mother. So I feel like we also have to focus on like how to call out anti-Blackness within the Latin American community in the West. So yeah, that's just my piece right there.
For sure. Yeah, thank you, Comrade Yamir. For sure, that's definitely a conversation that we need to have as well. You know, maybe that could be a topic for a future study session, and how to combat Black racism in our own community and the Latin American community. And another thing that I thought about when Comrade Yamir was talking, you know, he reminds me that I'm pretty sure he's been to Venezuela, and I was thinking that in Venezuela, you know, talking about the direct actions and the ways that we can organize ourselves to kind of perform the similar tasks of revolutionaries like Guevara and Cabral and others in this day and time, and apply it to our own conditions. Is, for example, in Venezuela, they've developed, and that's something as well that we need to think about. Like, we don't have to we don't have to develop these things. We don't have to think of ourselves as the creators of these things, because they have already been done. We can look to places like Venezuela and Cuba that have already created organizations and who have already worked with our people, our communities. For example, in Venezuela, they have the communes, where people can go to the communes and take part, participate in political discussion and political decisions, because you know, their leaders go to these assemblies and to these communes, and they can, you know, talk about what they're going to do in the community, how they're going to respond to the needs of the community, etc. So yeah, exactly. That's the kind of thing we need to do. We need to also look to the motherland and learn from the motherland. What are they doing? Especially the socialist nations like Venezuela, Cuba, Bolivia up until recently, and so on. I think Comrade Princesa wanted to talk.
So I'm really like just kind of going off of what Yamir said, because I was kind of thinking along the same lines, and you know, you guys were saying, oh, what should we talk about in future sessions, or what should read? And I definitely want to see a lot more connecting, you know, the Latin American diaspora to Black Lives Matter, especially because as an Afro-Latina, you know, I feel like I've noticed a lot of times people don't, you know, when they talk about Latin America, they don't talk about the Afro-Latinos, you know, they don't talk about how there's so many, like, you know, we say like, oh, Latinos should stand with this. Latinos are part of this. Latinos are this. Not necessarily every last person, but, you know, like where I'm from, it's one and the same, you know? So I feel like a lot of times, unfortunately, not everything, or not, I'm not saying that about this group specifically, but just in general, a lot of times people sort of relegate the Caribbean, for example, to the side that we don't exist, or that, you know, we're just kind of, you know, just whatever. And, you know, I definitely would love to see a lot more conversation if this is like going to be more Latin America focused, for example, connecting specifically because of the current events, specifically, you know, Puerto Rico, DR, Venezuela, Panama, you know, not that other countries don't have Afro-Latino populations, obviously, but just we have very, very large ones, you know, especially I'm interested in Puerto Rico because there is such a transnational diasporic connection. And, you know, a lot of us live side by side, you know, Latinos and Black Americans live side by side. You know, and there's people like, I think Carlos Cooks, I think I've heard of him. He's like a Dominican guy who I think influenced Malcolm X. I could be really wrong on that. It's one of those little things I don't know much about. There's Arturo Schomburg, I want to say his surname was. Like there's Schomburg. Okay, thank you. I always heard it. I always read it, but I never heard it said. You know, and kind of going off of how this is, you know, este es nuestra lucha. Like, you know, people talk about, you know, yeah, Black Lives Matter is important because slavery happened 400 years ago, but in Latin America, it was 550 years ago. And there's still a lot of issues today that are the same. You know, in Dominican Republic, people are still using their Haitian brothers and sisters like slaves, you know, just for sugar. You know, we are of the same people. And I think the beautiful thing about being diasporic as a Latin American is being able to connect outside of the sort of bubble that you live in when you're in the US, and connecting to the outside and saying, hey, look, this is the same thing over here, and this is your brother and sister. And if you didn't know when they opened their mouth where they were from, you would think that they were you. This is one and the same. And, you know, I heard in my community, there was a lady who did a dissertation on her PhD on like the Afro-Latino experience, and how, you know, to kind of take off the quote that as a Black person in the US, you have a double consciousness. As a Latino, you have a triple consciousness, or an Afro-Latino, you have a triple consciousness, where you are a Latino living in the US, a Black person living in the US, and you are living in the US. So just with regards to the fact that you guys were talking a lot about like Latin America in connection with Black Lives Matter and things like that, and just in general, these sort of literature, I think it's really important to highlight and bring to the center the Afro-Latino experience, both here and back home.
Cool. Yeah, thank you, Comrade Princesa. And that's, you know, one of the things I was saying in the introduction that I think nobody heard because of the connection. I was saying that our Marxism and our communism is different to the Eurocentric communism, which is the common communism that you find in the West, and it's different in the sense that we are intersectional communists. We don't see racism as a secondary contradiction. We see racism as a primary contradiction and as a pillar of capitalism. And I think, yeah, exactly like how Comrade Princesa was saying, we need to put that at the forefront, especially for us as Latin American diaspora, because we are Latin American and we come from countries where African populations are a significant part of our population, and yeah, we of course need to take that seriously, and we need to prioritize, especially in the current climate as well.
And also, just to say, like, not just here, but just because, like, you know, I know in other countries, like, for example, London, there's a huge influx of Dominicans, like, in this day and age, like, because of all the stuff that happened in Spain. So, you know, it's something that goes beyond just New York or Providence or Atlanta, but also, you know, Toronto and Montreal and London and a lot of other places. I think, you know, sometimes people just pocket it, but it's part of it, the whole thing, just kind of adding to that.
Sure, yeah. Okay, any other comrades have their hand up?
So I think Anthony Sid Aguirre is the last person with their hand up.
Okay, go ahead, comrade.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, thank you. So yeah, I kind of just wanted to build upon, you know, a few of the thoughts that a lot of, you know, you all were just conversing, and actually I think you guys covered a lot of what I was gonna, you know, input. So I don't want to seem redundant, right, with bringing it back up, but you know, I think what I kind of wanted to input was, you know, as we're starting to build up, you know, ways in which we, you know, should engage with our communities, right? Specifically, you know, colonized communities, right? First generation communities. You know, I think that as of right now, and, you know, just from purely my observation, I do still feel that, you know, we are, I don't want to put it in like this way, but a lacking of, like, you know, enough, I guess, you know, youth, right, involved with the movement, at least from what I've seen, you know, in my own community. And obviously that's not anybody's fault, but besides the institutionalization, right, through schooling and education. But I think that connecting with youth at that critical age, I would say probably like maybe just graduated from high school, right? Maybe looking to go into university and are really considering what is going on in the world around me, right? Why is it that we are speaking about abolition, or why is it that communism is being brought up, right? And I've seen personally a lot of students have those kind of thoughts, but might not be wanting to open it up first, right? So us that or for those of comrades that have had the privilege to get educated and get involved and really like delve into these topics and conversations, we should really also begin to try to invite our siblings, right? People that are around our age maybe, right? Obviously we want to talk to everybody within the community, right, of all age groups, right? But really where we see and what we've seen in the riots, or sorry, not the riots, the revolts that we're seeing, right? We're seeing a lot of youth out there, right? And obviously our point is to try to stop the spread of the liberalization of the revolts, or the revolts that are happening across the country. So we have to begin to also engage with those youth that are actually out there, and within in the struggle, right? And begin to kind of politicize them, right? So that's kind of just what I wanted to input there. Thank you.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you for that, comrade. And yeah, I think that's an important task that we have as well. And what I would suggest is that I think this, for example, this study session, I think is mostly targeted at comrades who already have some kind of some kind of level of understanding of what we're facing, and have some exposure to our political thoughts. And I think, of course, to try and engage our young Latin American people living in the diaspora, we need to change tactics, like how, again, going back to adapting our method to meet the specific demands of our people, and then we can apply that also to what methods do we use to attract young people, and to inform young people, and to try and win over the hearts of our young people. And I would say that maybe a call like this might not be the method. I was talking to one comrade, I don't remember who it was, one of the comrades I was organizing with the other week, and they were saying, why don't we go on TikTok? Why don't we go on TikTok and make TikTok videos to relate to a younger audience? And that's the kind of guerrilla social media thing that we need to start thinking about. For us here in London, for example, a lot of the Latin American leftists are older generation Latin American communists, or just leftists in general, whose methods are quite outdated, I would say. They still want to produce pamphlets and letters to hand out in the street, and that's cool. I wouldn't gun that down completely, because there's people that might benefit from that. But I think if we want to reach a younger audience, we have to get with the times. We have to adapt. We have to adapt our methods, and that's what we're trying to do with Anticonquista. Comrade Ramiro has done an awesome job at creating podcasts for people who might find it easier to consume information through listening, and which is one of the most popular formats right now. And so we have to get with the times, and specifically for young people, things like TikTok or Instagram and so on are channels that we need to start kind of thinking about populating. Otherwise, we're just going to repeat the same mistakes that the older generations have made. So yeah, thank you for that, comrade. I think it was Comrade Anthony, right? Any other comrades have any points? Have anything to say?
This is Ramiro. I need to actually head out, but I just want to give a shout out to all of you and to Carlos. And it was a really cool discussion. I feel like my IQ tripled just within this hour. So peace out, y'all. And I hope to see y'all at the next one. I really like the crew that we got here. I think we have a solid crew of people. And so I just wanted to say peace out to everybody.
Cool. Awesome. Thank you, Ramiro.
All right. Peace out.
All right. Peace. I think that we can start wrapping it up as well. Does anybody have any last point, any direct point on what we talked about? Okay, I think I can see people putting their hands up as well. Comrade Anthony, if you want to go ahead, I think you could.
Yeah, hello. Can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. I wanted to bring up the point earlier that you were talking about the younger generation, those who are just getting out of high school. And I, as someone who just got out of high school, I think a lot of things I see recently, especially with the recent what's going on in the United States today, especially amongst the Latin American community, is that a lot of my peers, what they want is action. And a lot of times that I think that a lot of mistakes that communist groups make in the United States especially is that they're very heavy on theory. They're very heavy on reading. And while a lot of times that is important in order to help form a cadre and help inform future action, a lot of times for people my age, they have the struggle of looking for action. I think that from reading through, a group that I really want to emphasize a lot is the Young Lords who were contemporaries to the Black Panther Party. And the reason I bring that up is because a lot of what they did is they found that the best way to get young people organized was when they were actually in the streets, either feeding their communities, or one of their most important things they did was the garbage offensive, in which New York City and barrios, they had the problem of where trash collectors wouldn't come in and collect the garbage, and so they would gather all the young people in the streets and have them pallet into the main entrance to the barrio, and that's when a lot of they would get recognition. And so I just wanted to make the point that sometimes things like this, that I think that the young Latin American community desperately is revolutionary, but because there's too much reading per se, and a lot of times they're just kind of tired of being read to, they just want to take action. And I think that looking into groups like that, who did things like such giving out free lead poison testing and stuff like that, would be very looking into ideas like that would be very important for them.
Yeah, that's an awesome point, comrade. And like we've been saying, I think we have to combine our ideology with action. I think when we're younger, we're itching to take action, and sometimes without theory. And then, like you say, in the West, there's a lot of theory and no action. And so I think what we need to start doing as a Latin American diaspora and through platforms like ours is promote the idea that we need to start doing both. Taking action and studying and understanding why we need to take action. But yeah, that's definitely something that we need to look into. And just to wrap it up, for the future sessions that we could do using Anticonquista's platform, is look into ways we can, that's a very important thing. The younger people are, I would say the most revolutionary element in our communities. I think it was Salvador Allende, the Chilean president who got ousted by Pinochet, who said that it's almost a crime for young people not to join the revolution and take part in the revolution. And I think we need to facilitate that. Some of you are younger than me, so maybe you can take the lead on that. But yeah, definitely Anticonquistas is here for that, exactly, to facilitate the conversation, and to facilitate the conversation in order for people to then go ahead and take action as well. Because we're an organization that though we started just as an information organization, right now we have transformed ourselves into a group that is supporting materially or very directly the action, the revolutionary action of our people in the homelands. So yeah, this is something, you know, and just to wrap it up, thank you to everybody who's joined. And if any of you have any ideas of future conversations that we can have, if any of you want to continue a particular thread that we've spoken about today, we can continue having this conversation. But again, always with the idea of something material and something and some kind of action coming out of it. Because we don't want to replicate, we don't want to continue the kind of line that Western communists and Western activists and socialists have taken, which is to kind of it's a kind of ideological and intellectual musing with no real outcome. So yeah, thank you to everyone that took part today. Thank you to Comrade Takia for her contributions, and thank you to everyone for their contributions. And 1 second. And yeah, so just let us know, inbox us, message us if you guys have any ideas of any future sessions that we could have on particular topics. All right, comrades, take care. Thank you for coming.